In ancient Rome, the crowd did not come to the arena to see men fight alone. They came to see power made visible. They came to watch bodies reduced to symbols and suffering transformed into spectacle. The gladiator stood at the center of this ritual not as a hero but as a tool, and behind every tool stood victims whose stories were never written. Prisoners of war, criminals, debtors, and the unwanted were drawn into a system that thrived on humiliation, control, and fear long before a blade was ever raised. Rome did not invent cruelty, but it perfected its display. When prisoners were brought into the city, they were not immediately executed or enslaved. First, they were processed by the state. Their bodies were examined, their strength measured, their usefulness assessed. Some were sold into labor, others into households, and a select few were marked for the arena. This was not a punishment reserved only for the worst offenders. It was a fate designed for those Rome wished to erase publicly. Gladiators themselves were not free men. Many were prisoners already condemned to violence. But within the hierarchy of the arena there were layers, and those at the bottom were the nameless captives who existed only to be broken. These prisoners were used in ways that went far beyond combat. They were instruments through which gladiators were trained, hardened, and controlled. Before a gladiator ever faced an opponent of equal status, he faced prisoners. These early fights were not contests. They were lessons. A prisoner armed, poorly trained, briefly, if at all, was placed before a trainee and ordered to fight. The outcome was never in doubt. What mattered was not victory but conditioning. Killing had to become routine. Hesitation had to disappear. Mercy had to be unlearned. The prisoner learned a different lesson. He learned that death was not the worst outcome. Fear was extended deliberately. Matches could be delayed, prolonged, or interrupted. Injured prisoners were dragged away, only to be returned later. The uncertainty was part of the punishment. Rome understood that anticipation of pain was more powerful than pain itself. Not all prisoners died quickly. Some were kept alive to serve as recurring victims. Their scars became familiar to the crowd. Their survival was not mercy but convenience. A body that could still move could still suffer again. The arena did not require novelty. It required endurance. Executions staged during games blurred the line between justice and entertainment. Prisoners were forced to reenact myths and legends, often cast as villains or monsters doomed to die. These performances allowed the crowd to view punishment as morality play rather than cruelty. The gladiator became executioner and actor at once. The prisoner became symbol, not person. What Rome hid carefully was what happened outside the arena. Prisoners used for training were kept in underground cells deprived of light and time. Food was minimal. Medical care was provided only to keep them alive, not well. Wounds were left untreated until infection weakened them further. A weakened prisoner posed less risk and greater spectacle. Gladiators were ordered to practice techniques on living bodies, not always to kill but to wound, disable, and control. This was considered essential training. Precision mattered. A skilled gladiator needed to know exactly how much force would cripple without ending a life too quickly. Prisoners became manuals written in flesh. Even experienced gladiators used prisoners to maintain dominance. A gladiator who showed sympathy risked punishment himself. Rome demanded emotional distance. Attachment was dangerous. A man who hesitated in the arena endangered the illusion of control. To prevent this, gladiators were rewarded for brutality and punished for restraint. The crowd was taught to enjoy this. Children watched. Families cheered. The suffering of prisoners became normalized. By framing the victims as criminals, enemies, or subhuman, Rome ensured that empathy never reached the arena floor. Once dehumanization is complete, any act becomes acceptable. Some prisoners were used repeatedly as sparring partners until their bodies failed. Others were deliberately matched against beasts to test reactions and provoke fear responses in gladiators. The purpose was not realism but dominance. A gladiator who could remain composed while another human screamed was ready for anything. Rome justified this system through law and tradition. Prisoners had no rights once condemned. Their bodies belonged to the state. The arena was presented as an extension of justice. But justice implies proportion, and this system was not proportional, it was performative. Punishment was measured not by crime but by entertainment value. What disturbed even some Roman observers was the intimacy of this violence. Gladiators lived among their victims. They trained near them, heard them cry, and watched them decay. The boundary between executioner and captive blurred. Many gladiators were themselves former prisoners who had survived long enough to be promoted. They knew exactly what awaited those beneath them. This created a cycle that reinforced itself. A man who had once begged learned to command. A man who had once been powerless learned to dominate. Rome relied on this transformation. It turned victims into enforcers and enforcers into symbols. Responsibility dissolved into tradition. Records from physicians who served gladiator schools revealed chilling details. Injuries were catalogued, studied, and replicated. The human body was treated as equipment. Prisoners provided data. Their suffering advanced technique. Rome learned how much blood could be lost before collapse, how long a man could endure pain, and how fear altered movement. This knowledge fed back into the spectacle, making it more efficient and more brutal. Death in the arena was not always immediate. A prisoner who fell might be left alive until the crowd decided his fate. This delay was intentional. It allowed the audience to feel power. A thumb raised or lowered sealed a life. The gladiator merely obeyed. Responsibility shifted upward and outward. Violence became collective. What makes this Rome's darkest secret is not that violence existed. It is that it was structured, ritualized, and celebrated. Prisoners were not simply killed. They were consumed emotionally and socially before their bodies failed. Their humanity was stripped piece by piece until nothing remained worth saving. Rome built its identity on order, law, and civilization. But beneath that image lay an economy of suffering that depended on prisoners whose names were never recorded. Gladiators were remembered, emperors were celebrated, victims vanished, and yet the empire could not function without them. Because the arena was not about sport. It was about reminding every person watching what happened to those who lost Rome favor. It was a warning delivered through blood and silence. This was how Rome maintained control, and this was only the beginning of what the arena demanded. When the gates of the arena closed and the crowd drifted back into the streets of Rome, the violence did not end. It simply moved underground. Beneath the stone floors where blood had soaked into sand, prisoners who survived another day were dragged back into darkness where time lost meaning and pain became routine. Rome liked to believe that what happened in the arena was justice fulfilled. In reality, it was a cycle that fed on itself long after the cheers faded. Prisoners who lived through repeated exposure to gladiatorial violence were rarely the same people who had entered the system. Survival required the surrender of self. Fear became constant. Sleep fractured. Memory blurred. Many no longer knew how long they had been confined or why. The waiting itself was torture because death was not scheduled. It was postponed. A prisoner might be spared one day only to be dragged out again weeks later without warning. Uncertainty hollowed the mind. Those deemed no longer entertaining enough were not released. They were reassigned. Some were sent to quarries, mines, or construction projects where conditions were worse than the arena but less visible. Others were kept near the gladiator schools as permanent tools. These prisoners cleaned wounds, disposed of bodies, and prepared weapons. They lived surrounded by reminders of what awaited them. This proximity ensured compliance more effectively than chains. Gladiators depended on this system as much as they were trapped within it. Though celebrated by the crowd, they were owned by their schools and subject to severe punishment. A gladiator who refused to harm a prisoner risked beatings, confinement, or death. Compassion was framed as disobedience. Over time, many learned to detach entirely. Emotional numbness was rewarded. Humanity became a liability. Rome cultivated this detachment deliberately. The state needed reliable performers. A man who hesitated endangered the spectacle. To ensure obedience, trainers emphasized repetition. The same acts carried out again and again until they lost emotional weight. Prisoners were central to this process. They were expendable bodies upon which technique and dominance could be rehearsed endlessly. Medical care reveals the true intent of the system. Gladiators received treatment designed to keep them fighting. Prisoners received treatment designed only to keep them alive long enough to be useful. Physicians recorded injuries, studied endurance, and tested limits. Knowledge gained from prisoner suffering improved arena efficiency. Pain became data. Human beings became measurements. The crowd played a crucial role in sustaining this cruelty. Spectators learned to read suffering as entertainment. Their reactions guided the pace and intensity of violence. A crowd board demanded escalation. Prisoners paid the price. Rome taught its citizens to participate emotionally in punishment without responsibility. When everyone is involved, no one is accountable. Children attended games. They watched prisoners beg and die. They learned early that power belonged to those who inflicted pain and that mercy was weakness. This lesson shaped Roman culture far beyond the arena. Authority became performative. Punishment required spectacle. Fear became governance. Some Romans grew uneasy with this intimacy. Philosophers questioned the moral cost. Jurists debated excess, but these concerns rarely translated into action. The arena was too useful. It reinforced hierarchy, reminded subjects of their place, and distracted the masses from instability. Cruelty had become infrastructure. As centuries passed, the games intensified. Audiences grew numb. What once shocked, now barely registered. Executions became more elaborate not because crime increased, but because spectacle demanded novelty. Prisoners were forced into increasingly degrading roles to satisfy appetite. Rome had trained itself to crave suffering. This escalation strained the empire. Resources drained into spectacle. Moral authority eroded. Provinces watched Rome entertain itself with cruelty and learned that the empire ruled through terror rather than law. Loyalty based on fear is fragile. When pressure came, it shattered. Religion played a role in the eventual decline of the arena. New beliefs emphasized the value of individual life and the meaning of suffering beyond entertainment. These ideas clashed with the logic of the games. Resistance grew slowly, unevenly, but persistently. The legitimacy of public killing weakened. Economic pressures also mounted. Maintaining gladiator schools, feeding crowds, and replacing bodies became costly. As wars and crises multiplied, Rome could no longer afford the scale of spectacle it once enjoyed. Restrictions followed not from compassion but necessity. When gladiatorial games finally faded, prisoners did not suddenly gain dignity. Many were simply redirected into other forms of labor and punishment. The system shifted rather than disappeared, but something essential changed. The arena no longer defined Roman identity, yet the damage remained. Centuries of normalized cruelty had shaped how Romans viewed power, obedience, and humanity. Violence had been ritualized. Empathy had been trained out of the public conscience. This legacy did not vanish with the last game. History remembers gladiators as symbols of courage, endurance, and resistance. Emperors are remembered as patrons of spectacle. Prisoners are forgotten. Their names were never recorded. Their stories were never told. Without them, the arena could not exist, yet they remain invisible. This is Rome's darkest secret, not the bloodshed itself, but the system that transformed suffering into entertainment and taught an empire to watch without flinching. Prisoners were not merely executed, they were used, studied, and erased. And when Rome finally collapsed, it did so under the weight of many failures. But one of them was learned here in the sand of the arena. A society that learns to enjoy suffering eventually loses the ability to recognize its own. This was the true legacy of the gladiator games.